The difference between we, a big we, and we the people, and the actual list of names that signed the Constitution, 39 of them, is the difference between abundance and scarcity. It is the difference between free speech and what we're living in now. So we've been here before, right? There's this thing that happened in World War I. Ultimately, the government went after thousands of people, including Eugene V. Debs, who ran for president multiple times, jailing people for criticizing the U.S. government. It was illegal under the Sedition Act to criticize the U.S. government, and it was enforced federally and across the states. There are many state laws of this kind, right? So people were criticized, they were locked up, they were jailed, and then 3 years later, Congress overturned this act. The Supreme Court initially was fine with the Sedition Act, and then they came to understand that they were essentially destroying the Constitution by enforcing it. And they started to dissect it, pick it apart, pull away from it, right? This is what I'm thinking about now, because today, students at Columbia and alumni from Columbia were hit with penalties of things that they did last year. So last year, when students were protesting Gaza, one of the buildings in Columbia was taken over. Students have been taking over college buildings since long before I was born, since long before any of you were born. That's just the way that we do things here. It's one of the many ways in which we have exercised free speech rights in this country and expressed dissatisfaction with the policies of institutions. The difference between then and now is that while there was a lot of finger wagging and jailing and whatnot in the 1960s and 70s, when students graduated from college, they kept their diplomas. And now Columbia University has set a precedent in which that diploma could be taken away from you after graduation because someone decided they didn't like your speech. And now we have green card holders who exercise free speech rights. Again, they didn't declare war on the government. They didn't commit crimes, right? They didn't do what Sacco and Vanzetti did when they actually killed someone, right? That's not what's on the table here. This is just speech. And the buildings that were taken over were not vandalized the way that the U.S. Capitol was by people who invaded it on January 6th. And people were not threatened with being hanged, and no police officers ended up losing their lives or their safety. So again, we have a situation in which January 6th happens and all those people get pardoned. J.D. Vance goes to Europe and gives this speech about how there's no free speech in Europe and that we need to protect free speech and it's the most important thing in the world. And all across the United States, websites are being scrubbed of any mention of DEI. Federal funding is being pulled away from institutions that have anything to do with criticism of foreign policy. People are being abducted, losing green cards, losing diplomas. That's the chapter of free speech we're in now. We're in the 1918 chapter of free speech. We're not in the thoughtful re-examination of that. We are looking at we the people and only seeing a list of names that are acceptable. That's Donald Trump, Mike Johnson, Speaker of the House, Elon Musk, who's apparently allowed to do whatever the hell he wants. Like, these are the people that are allowed to exist under we the people. And if you're not on that list, what happens to you? Apparently, you don't have rights. The most useful analogy, of course, is to talk about Animal Farm, which I'm pretty sure like everybody had to read. You know, it's a pretty thin book. You maybe read it pretty young, right? Maybe you were in 6th grade, maybe you were in middle school, maybe you were in high school. Maybe you got to read it in college. Maybe you found it in a bookstore or a library and you read it for fun. But in Animal Farm, there's this moment in which they officially declare that not all animals are equal, that some are more equal than others. So this is the spot, right? This is the tension point. The tension point is around this idea that like people in power get to define that they're more equal than everybody else. And this is the thing we're supposed to agree is just fundamentally flawed and wrong, no matter what. No matter where we're from, no matter what our ideology, bent, religion, or experience, we're supposed to be very critical of this idea that someone arbitrarily uses their power to exclude others. They make the we the people small. The we is limited to a list of names and not abundant and not free. Not just, not humane. And again, what you're left with is madness. Because if you're not outraged at the notion that a man was kidnapped and had his green card taken and separated from his wife, who was about to give birth to their child, over speech, if you're not alarmed that not only is there an open war on funding, but also an open war on criminal prosecution and consequences for people who are involved in speech. Again, you don't need to be a member of the ACLU. You don't need to be somebody who has a very, pious opinion of universal free speech. You can certainly have mixed feelings about it and tensions around it, right? Wonder who should be allowed to speak in certain places or be awarded or rewarded in certain ways. Like, I think all of those conversations and debates are fair, but I think that's the point. We're supposed to have a space in which we can have these debates and hold that tension, because it's a big we. The big we is the debate. The big we is the disagreement. The big we is what makes this country work. The reason why this country has been able to fix itself and correct itself is the ability to go back to this big we the people, that everyone can fit under that we. That is abolition, that is suffrage, that is civil rights, that is even environmental protection, it is even housing, it is even any of the things that we're doing. It's nonprofits, it's philanthropy, it's civil service, it's military service, it's becoming a firefighter. Like, everything that you do that is meant to be bigger than yourself, your faith journey, your spiritual journey, your healing from trauma and pain journey, like all of those things are possible when there is a big we, when there is space for those changes, when there is space for those evolutions. Because when there's not that, when there's a limit, when there's someone who can arbitrarily determine if you're free or you're not only is that authoritarianism, it's also a caste system. Because if you're not going to get dictated as somebody who gets free speech, you are dictated as someone who does not. If you're going to be the animal that is not equal on the Orwellian Animal Farm, then why should you belong to that farm? What is the purpose of supporting an order that does that? There isn't. And here we are once again, staring back at the mirror of 1918 and wondering how it is that we are prosecuting people for sedition in this country. I would hope that everyone would want us to be a little bit more evolved 100 years later and not repeating the exact same mistakes that were committed